Hey y'all, how is it going? Happy Monday. Um, Today we are going to talk about section 11.3, which is actually getting into charting a budget. I'm kind of going to split this guy in half just to make it a little bit more feasible, and then we're going to create a budget either later this week or maybe next week, and then we're almost done. We've only got a couple weeks left of school. Um, so yeah, last time I left you, we were talking about section 11.2, which was electronic utilities. So like figuring out like what's the best type of phone plan, data, things like that, calculating how much it costs to have, Wi-Fi or cable, and charting those expenses when we do start to actually create a budget. Thinking about those things, those are some expenses that oftentimes we kind of forget about, that vary from month to month. So, getting into charting a budget, we're going to kind of talk about the basics before we talk about how to actually build one. And I'm doing about half of the examples today. So, 3 examples today, and then like 2 or 3 examples later on in the week. And then we will start actually charting a budget. But today, the learning objectives for this whole section, when they're split together, is you guys will be able to create and use a budget checkoff chart. I'm going to practice that today. And we will be able to visualize and interpret a budget using a circle graph, bar graph, line graph, and budget line graph. Specifically today, I'm only going into checkoff charts and circle graphs. Later on in the week, we'll be discussing bar graphs, line graphs, and budget line graphs a little bit more in depth. So let's get it poppin'. All right. One thing I want to pause and ask you guys, and this is actually going to be your warm up today in your hyperdoc, you'll see. My essential question for y'all is, why is it so important to know how and when money is coming in and going out? So think about that, permeate that for a sec. Why is it important to know when you've got money coming into your account and money coming out of your account? What's the purpose of knowing when money is coming in and going out? How is that helpful to you? And think about that in the context of building a budget. Why might that be really important for us to know as adults in managing our money? Hmm. So hopefully by the end of this, you guys will be able to answer that question, and I'll see your guys' responses on your warm up. Cool beans. Do you guys like my face on the $100? And me with my cat J Money with some cash flow. I thought it was cute. All right, so how can you visualize your budget is kind of what we're starting off on here in this section before actually creating one. How can you visualize a budget that you're going to create? So charts that relate to your personal budget can help us understand when money's coming in and when it's going out. The most common type of budget is a budget chart, which is what you usually see. This can either be like a checkoff list, it can have numeric entries or numbers for when things are going into your account and when things are leaving your account. One of the budget charts is a monthly budget checkoff chart, which is literally just you check off the expenses as they come in month to month. Over the course of the year, which allows you to plan accordingly. Now, it doesn't allow you to plan really specifics, but it does give you a great overall idea of when you can expect certain um, expenses to happen over the course of the year, which is really important to know as you're creating monthly budgets, because something that might surprise you is that when you do have a budget, it's not always consistent from month to month. It's not always the same. For the most part, they're going to be the same essential costs from month to month that aren't really going to waver, such as like, your mortgage payment or your rent, right? Groceries, gas, things like that. Your cable bill is probably not going to waiver, or Wi-Fi provider, things like that. But there are some additional costs that we don't think about that happen throughout the year. And a monthly budget checkoff chart will help us in visualizing when we can expect to have additional costs occur, like back to school. If if you're going back to school, you end up having to pay, like when you all go to college, you're going to have to pay for all y'all's textbooks at the beginning of that semester. And believe it or not, textbooks are so expensive. Like you can expect to spend at least, even with used textbooks, at least $600 a semester, at least. And that's if you're getting a steal, depending on what kind of course you're taking. So those are some hidden costs that you don't really think about until you're like, oh shoot, here we are. Um, Also, like whenever your car registration is due, that's a higher cost, and that happens once a year. So those are some types of things that you can expect on a monthly budget checkoff chart. So here's an example of a monthly budget checkoff chart. Notice that there is just checks everywhere. This is sample A. And if I go over to the left side, these rows is what they're called. We've got health, insurance, prescriptions, over-the-counter meds, doctor visits, life insurance, health club dues, etc. And on the right, which is our columns, we have the months of the year. So a budget checkoff chart is shown below for health-related expenses, right? All of this stuff is related to health. So a subdivision of your budget is going to have to go towards health costs. And it might not seem that prevalent right now, especially at such a young age. Y'all are probably still on your parents' insurance. You can stay on your parents' insurance until you reach the age of 26. But you do have to pay for insurance. It's not free unless you qualify for Medi-Cal, something like that. You also have to pay if you get sick or you have a prescription or you have some sort of health issue, like I have allergies. I have to pay for my allergy medicine. Over-the-counter meds, doctor's visits, they're not free. Once you enroll in life insurance, you'll have that yearly cost. Um, And then if you belong to a gym, health club dues, which I think a lot of you guys do belong to some sort of health club. You guys do go to some sort of gym. That's something that is in the health realm as well, that you will have um, a cost for. So in this particular example, it looks like they pay for this upfront once a month. Maybe they go to Costco and get the hookup on 24-hour fitness or something like that. I don't know. I pay mine month to month. So notice there's no amounts. There's just checks in the months where the expenses are happening when they're occurring. So this kind of starts to give us a really good idea that every month I notice that there's a check for my over-the-counter medicine, my allergy medicine. So I can expect to have that same fee every single month as I'm budgeting my money. Oops. And yeah, this helps you kind of come up and visualize when you're going to have certain expenses. So notice that our over the counter is every single month. Every other month is our prescriptions. So if it's not over the counter, insurance is 1, 2, 3, 4 quarterly. Every 3 months, you're paying for insurance. Doctor's visits twice a year. Life insurance maybe 3 times a year. And then in this particular example that's shown here, they're paying for the gym or other health club dues once a year. Mine would have checks all across the entire thing, um, and so on and so forth. But this is the budget checkoff chart. This is one type of budget charts that help you start to visualize where your money is going out because you're paying for these costs. You're paying for these expenses. Now here is the second chart. It looks almost exactly the same, right? It still has health insurance, prescriptions, over-the-counter meds, doctors, life insurance, health club dues. All of that stuff is the same categories as before on the left-hand side. And then up here, we still have our months, but now it actually has numerical values instead of just a check mark everywhere there was. So this is like a traditional budget chart. Um, for our health related expenses, as it not only tells us like when these expenses are occurring, but how much as well. There are amounts which helps when we are actually building our monthly budget. And we can still use this to expect when these expenses are coming. So I'm going to put them all together. Right, here's both of them, sample A and sample B, our checkoff budget chart, and then our traditional budget chart with numerical values here. And there are pros and cons to using both, and you can use either one. Well, you have a couple options actually. You can use just the checkoff chart if you would like, if that tickles your fancy, if that works for you, that's fine. You can use just a regular budget chart if you would like, so kind of like sample B, if that works for you, that's totally fine. Or you can use a conjunction of the both of them. But either way, this helps you really visualize your financial obligations that you have as an adult. You can use them together or choose one. That's totally your choice. But there are pros and cons to each type. I probably would kind of do more of, since it's more visual anyway, I probably, if I were to use one of these, I would probably use the traditional budget type because I can visually see, oh, here's what's happening every month. Maybe even make a note to the side. This is monthly. This is every other month, right, and those types of things. But there is perks to using both of them. So notice that A shows that the most costs occur in December, right? I've got 1, 2, 3, 4 checklists right here versus every other month. The maximum I have is 3. Right, so this visually shows me like December, I have a ton of costs. Plus, there's holidays and stuff happening around December, so there's additional costs going on in there that you're going to have to think about too. However, sample B, our traditional budget chart, shows that the most expensive costs are actually in September because this person is paying $600 a year for their gym, plus insurance is coming out. Insurance is coming out that month, and they're still paying for their monthly medicine. So there's perks to both. I probably honestly would just use this bottom one. I like working with numbers, and I would actually kind of change this. But yeah, so let's see. But budget charts aren't the only way that you can visualize your financial obligations over time. Like we got the little SpongeBob chilling right here. Financial obligations. um, Obviously, there's a bunch of different ways. That's really nice, but it's not the only way that you can visualize your obligations and the things you have to pay for over time. And we're going to kind of explore this before we actually build one. So circle graphs, aka pie charts, present data in percentages. So that's where usually we kind of start off with thinking about how much income do we have coming in and how much can we approximate is going towards certain types of expenses out of that monthly earned income, and creating a percentage. Some people might say 50% of my salary, my monthly salary, goes towards rent or a mortgage payment. And then you have to split up the other 50% between all of your other costs and fees that you have, other financial obligations. A line graph, which we'll talk about next time, shows changes over time, which is really, really great to use when you are comparing your budgets from year to year and actually like comparing your spending and seeing, the trends and kind of predicting the changes and what you can do to save money. Line graphs are great for that. Bar graphs are nice because those are the ones you've seen most of the time. Those are like histograms. They use them a ton in statistics. It just compares the categories of data based on like frequency or amount spent. So this is a nice visual way to see exactly how much you're spending versus a percentage, exactly how much is going towards each like category in the pie chart. How much are you spending out of your monthly income towards those values? And then budget line graphs are used when you're comparing two categories And you guys will kind of see that in a second. That kind of gets into more of like the analytical. Most often, y'all will either have like a pie chart, a line graph, or bar graphs, but budget line graphs are really cool to get into the nitty gritty of your budget. Budget line graphs show like how much you can spend so that you can afford both categories within whatever your budgeted income is. So it's like I said, it really kind of gets into the analytics of like, okay, here's your maximum amount that you can spend for both of these. Otherwise, it's unattainable, or you're going over your budget, or something like that. So here's some pictures, right? This is our typical like circle graph, pie graph, right? You see them like broken apart. It represents certain values. It has like a percentage and a number value to it, perhaps. This is our typical bar graph or histogram looking thing where you can see the categories compared from month to month. And then this is a line graph where you can start to see the trends and see what you're spending from month to month. And then this is a budget line graph. So this says like if you're within this value, underneath this line, you are able to afford it based on your certain value. Once you go above that line, you've gone over budget, you're not able to afford it, you might have to cut back somewhere else, or go into debt and use a credit card, which like we talked about, you don't really want to do because interest, and we hate interest, right? This is just a weird example I found on the internet, but I wanted to give you guys a visual representation of what we're used to and something that gets into a little bit of optimization actually, which was one of my favorite applied classes in my undergrad. It was really neat. Okay, so let's do 3 examples and then we'll call it a day. So create a year-long budget checkoff matrix that keeps track of the following household expenses and when they are due. So notice that this doesn't tell us how much. It just tells us certain expenses related to the house. This is not all expenses. And it tells us how often I'm going to be paying for them. So mortgage, we have that monthly. Utilities, also monthly. Sanitation, quarterly. So some sanitation costs are trash, like you have to pay for trash and stuff like that. That's a sanitation fee that you have to pay to the city wherever you reside in. So perhaps that's paid quarterly. You only pay it 4 times a year. Insurance, you re-up twice a year. You have a 6-month insurance cost on your home. Internet, you pay that semi-annually as well. Landline telephone, pretend you're getting a bundle and that's the cheapest way to go. You get that monthly, and your landline is tied with your cellular, so you pay that monthly as well. Lawn and garden, say you have a gardener, you pay for that monthly, but only during like springy, summery, not so much in fall and winter. So April through September only. Snow removal, pretend we're living, somewhere where it snows. So that would have to be like the winter months when we would get snow. So obviously November, January, March. I guess December, we're just living with December and February. We are just staying in, snowed in. I don't know. I didn't make up this example. Food, obviously, monthly cost. Childcare, we have children now. Every other month, something to think about. They are expensive. And then all of us want pets. We love them, but you got a vet expense semi-annually. So how can we create a budget long checkoff matrix, a budget checkoff chart essentially that keeps track of all of these? Step 1 would be start off by creating a table with the months as a column and expenses as the rows. So in case you forgot what a column and row looks like, this is for Excel, but this is literally like anytime someone expresses something as a column and row, a column runs vertically, kind of like you would think of like a Greek column. That's literally how I remember. Greek columns go up and down, and they're like those white I don't know, pretty looking columns. And then rows, I think about when you're sitting in a row at the movie theater, or you decide what row you're going to choose when you go to like a concert or a show or something like that. So the rows run horizontally as if you were choosing your seat in a movie theater. So the months are going to be columns. The months are going to be running vertically. So January, February, March, April, May, June, all that, right? All the way to December. And then the expenses are going to be these horizontal values here. Step 2, we have the amount or the time when these expenses are happening. So just start off by checking the months as you go through each row. And step 3, continue until you've reached all of these expenses. Now, something to notice too, the way this is set up is it shows the rows run horizontal, and here's our rows. Mortgage is going to be a row. Utility is going to be a row. Sanitation is a row, and so on and so forth down here. So we're just going to create like a table, and it's going to be, let's see, it's going to be 12 across because that's how many months we have for columns. And then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So it's essentially like a 12 by 12 chart, not including the labels. So it's probably 13 by 12. No, 13 by 13 chart that we're going to create. And here it is, right? So saved you the time. Here's all of my rows, or my rows: mortgage, utility, sanitation, insurance, blah, blah, blah. And then my months here. And I'm just checking them off based on what it is. So my utilities, notice we're monthly. Something really important, we have to know what's the difference between monthly, quarterly, semi-annually. These ones tell you specific months, right? So monthly, check off every single time. Monthly, boom. Sanitation, again, was quarterly. Quarterly means you pay it 4 times a year. How often, if there's 12 months in a year, how often are you going to pay that bill quarterly? If you pay it 4 times a year, that's going to be 1 to every 3 months, 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 so quarterly. Insurance is semi-annually in June and December, the 6th month and the 12th month, or maybe it's January and June. I don't know. Internet's monthly, landline is monthly, cell phone's monthly. Lawn and garden, you're only paying during the summer months from April to September, so check off every single month there. Snow removal starts in December and goes through March. Oh, so it does. Huh. Let's read that again. Maybe I typed it incorrectly. Whatever. Food, I'll have to go back and fix that. Food, obviously monthly. Childcare, every other month. And the vet twice a year. So June and December again, or January and July. Your choice on setting that up. But that's one easy way to set up a budget checkoff chart. Now, getting into the pie charts a little bit. So Jeff budgets his monthly expenses. So he's done the legwork. He realized how much money he has coming in. He broke down all of the costs that he pays, and he realizes that they can be grouped into 5 essential groups. Household, which is kind of like the checkoff chart we just talked about. Education, Jeff's going to school or has student loan debt to pay off. Transportation is a really huge expense that a lot of people don't think about. When they think about independent living, you forget about your car payment, you forget about your insurance, you forget about fuel, things like that. Health, he also is a smart guy, so he's putting away stuff for savings. And then miscellaneous other costs. This could be fun money, which is what I like to call it. It could be just other expenses that don't occur as frequently, things like that. So he's budgeted. He's figured, okay, I spend about 40% of my income on household, 25% on education, 15% on transportation, 5% on health, 10% in savings, and 5% miscellaneous different costs and expenses. So he used a software program to construct this pie chart to show his expense percentages. How did his category percentages affect the construction of the chart. So think about this for a second. It is not a trick question. Trust. So when you use the software to figure out how did the category percentages affect the way that the pie chart looks? Give you guys a minute to think about that. How does these percentages affect how the chart looks, how it's constructed? What do you notice? What do you think is a conclusion that you can draw from that? Okay, I'm done. Well, so obviously pie charts are completely related to percentages and they have to be proportional to those percentages, right? This a household expense is 40%. That's the largest percent of all of them. Obviously, the largest percent has to have the largest piece of the pie, right? And then education is the second largest. So that's 25% or a quarter of the pie. So it has to be proportional to the percentage, right? That's how the category percentages affect the construction of the chart. The bigger the percentage, the bigger the slice of the pie. The smaller the percentage, the smaller the slice of the pie, right? And they're all proportional. Like if this is 10%, this is exactly half of that. If this is 5% and this is 5%, these two put together are the same amount as the savings, right? um, so this just says that the percentages match the slice of the pie. So, for example, since Jeff's household expenses are 40% of his budget, the central angle, meaning this little piece right here, let me get my laser pointer. Central angle would be this value from trig. This value of theta right here is going to be 40% of 360 degrees, since 360 degrees is an entire circle rotation, right? So this has to be 40% of that to make sure that this is proportional to 40% of the pie, right? 40% of 360 is 144 degrees. So this obtuse angle is 144 degrees in measure. Also, how do we figure that out? Well, I'm going to multiply the decimal equivalent by 360 degrees. So 0.4 times 360 is 144, and that's what gave me this value. So overall, this software is using multiplication of decimal equivalents and 360 degrees to figure out how large does each slice need to be. And this is kind of a little breakdown. So, right, household is 40%, 0.4 times 360, that gave us 144 degrees, which matches how big this piece of green pie is, right? Education is 25%, 0.25 times 360, that's 90 degrees, a right angle. Transportation is 15, and so on and so forth. And notice that all of these angles add up to 360 properties of circles, right? And all of these percentages add up to 100, which is how you have to break down your budget. You can't go over the amount that you have. That would mean you don't have a budget, you're going over budget, you're going into debt. And then if you had less, you're not accounting for all of the potential costs. Now, your miscellaneous, you don't have to use all 5% of it. That's usually where if you have more money in your income, maybe add a little bit more into your savings or add a little bit more fund money, or, you have to think about those things. But your percentages should add up to be 100%, and the measures of the angles should add up to be 360, which is exactly what the software is doing. So now let's kind of dig in to visualizing. We can see how this works. You guys can use different software if you're working on like Excel spreadsheets. There's a way to do that. I'm just going to shoot you guys a website for part of your homework today when working with this. But sometimes we kind of want to make some inferences based upon looking and maybe comparing other people's budget charts with ours. So Kate and Paul budget $800 a month just for transportation. And that's shown below in the pie chart. So that is an awful lot. But again, remember, this is two people for transportation. And I don't really know what Kate and Paul happen to do. What information can we conclude from this pie chart? So this is kind of taking the values, taking the information and making an inference, and determining some conclusions based on not really knowing them at all, but being able to read a chart. And that's probably a skill that so many people lack. But it's not that crazy. So I want you guys to take a minute and think about what can you conclude from this pie chart. Looking at this, and this is just for transportation, and they spend about $800 a month. That's their budget. They can afford $800 a month together. What can you conclude from looking at this pie chart here? Have you guys take a minute, pause the video, perhaps think about what you can conclude, what you can infer based on an $800 transportation budget where they have fuel, insurance, repairs, car wash, parking, train, bus, and miscellaneous. Okay, so there's a few things, right? Right off the bat, I can't tell exactly how much is budgeted because I don't have, like, it doesn't tell me the percentages here, so I can't figure out, like a certain 25% times 800 means, they're spending a certain amount since it's not telling me. But I can kind of start to ballpark it though, because I know that this looks like a quarter of my circle, right? A quarter would be approximately 25% of it. So although I won't be able to find out exactly, I can kind of start to estimate and get a good idea of about how much money that Kate and Paul are spending out of this budget for each. So for the first thing, like, they spend a lot of it on fuel. I can see that it's about to be 25%. So if I did 0.25 times 800, I would get that they spend $200 a month on fuel combined, which maybe she spends 100 and he spends 100. Maybe he has a truck, so he spends 150 and she has a fuel efficient car. So she spends, $50 a month or whatever it is. I don't know their situation, but that's something I can conclude from this pie chart. And I can kind of approximate that one particular cost because it seems pretty clear to me that that's how much that is. Also, looking further, I noticed that repairs and parking have about similar amounts budgeted. So if I put repairs and parking together, that looks to be about a quarter. So I know that they're probably spending on average $200 in parking. It sounds like they live in like some sort of like metropolitan area if they're traveling by train and bus, but also have to pay for parking, not free parking. That means it's like a big city. Like, y'all know, you can't go to San Diego and find parking anywhere. You gotta pay for it, which sucks. Um, but it looks like this parking and repairs is also about a quarter of the cost. So that's maybe about $200 of their budget as well. Trains and bus looks to be a little bit more than a quarter. Um, so that would be like the second highest fuel being the first and that being the second. So they're probably spending a little bit more than 200, maybe $300, give or take. I'm not sure. 250 on riding the train or bus. And that's kind of a lot, especially if they're paying for parking too and repairs. So maybe one person, uses the train or bus and one person drives a vehicle or something like that. Um, They also don't spend a lot of money on car washes, but they still account for it. So I just know that that's a cost that they have. Maybe they're super busy and they don't wash their cars themselves, which you would still have to pay for, like water and pay in time, and then any type of special soaps or whatever you have. But they do get a car wash, so that's a cost that they have to incur. And then the amount budgeted for repairs looks to be like about half of fuel. Like, it's not alone. It's like, since parking and repairs together would make up fuel, then this is probably about 50% of the fuel cost, and this is probably 50% of the fuel cost. So these, give or take, are going to be about $100 each or so. Just making an inference based on what I see here. And the miscellaneous costs tend to look to be about half, like, I can't really tell for sure, but it looks to be about half the cost of the train. So maybe other things come up for transportation. Perhaps there is, in addition to the train or bus fee that you use to ride it, there's like, some monthly membership or something, or a fee that incurs somewhere else. Um, for travel or transportation, or maybe that's part of their vacation that they're thinking about, something like that. So, just based on this, we came up with a bunch of different inferences, and I'm sure there's a ton more. Like I infer that these people uh, live in a metropolitan area just because they're paying for parking and a train or bus fee, which is kind of crazy to me. Um, and that they spend, whoever's driving spends a lot of money on fuel, so they maybe are working somewhere with quite a commute, um, in comparison to the person that rides the train or bus also has a really long commute, and maybe they only have one vehicle if someone else is riding the train or bus. So these are some different inferences that you can make based on this information. But I just wanted to kind of get us started here. And then we're going to talk about the bar graphs and line graphs tomorrow. And then we will start to talk about how to actually build a budget, create a budget for ourselves, for our future selves. I'm going to do it along with you. And yeah, so that's all I have for you guys today, keeping it nice, short, and simple. So I will see you guys later this week. I hope y'all have a wonderful day and catch you soon. Peace.